right.
Have a seat, Jude.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
All right.
Jude, I just accurately pronounced the name of your organization, which right off the bat, that's a victory so far in this interview.
Yeah, you waited till 5 p.m. to discuss pharmacopoeia.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Now, you're working in particular on a program at USP, which is around quality medicine. You're a senior director there. You spent most of your career in Nigeria, your home country. You've lived all over the world, all over Africa, all over the world, working on this systems question of when we go to the pharmacy and we get a medicine, do we know if it's real? Do we know if it's quality? Those kinds of basic things. And from what I understand, here in the United States, for example, we assume that to be the case, but in much of the world it's not. There's about 2 billion people don't have access to just basic medicine. And for maybe 10% of the medicines out there are counterfeit or low quality. It's a huge industry. It's like 430-something billion in counterfeit medicines around the world. So this is exactly what you work on every day. You're after the counterfeiters. You're after the low-quality medicine. Tell us how you do that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raj. So United States Pharmacopoeia, as you mentioned, was established about 200 years ago. And this was really as a result of some physicians that were concerned. They had some worries about the medicines that they prescribe for their patients. So they convened in 1820 here in Washington, D.C., precisely, to really begin to think about that issue, that problem. And from then, United States Pharmacopoeia has been working to really ensure the protection of the public health by having quality medicines. It might interest you to know that we are recognized by the U.S. law, and our standards are enforced by US FDA. And I think it's not just within the US. We have about 140 countries in the world that recognize United States Pharmacopoeia, the public standards that we have. And indeed, it's really as a result of that expertise that USP has, as well as the global recognition that way back in 1992, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, really wanted us to help and transfer this sort of scale to low and middle income countries. So we've been having different iterations of program with USAID. The current one is the Promoting the Quality of Medicines program. The PKM program has a very interesting mandate. That mandate is to really go and work with the likes of our US FDA, get them to do the right thing, get them to do things the right way to protect their population. And another part of that mandate is to really support for manufacturing of quality assured medicines. And you begin to realize how important this is. Raj, 5 million mothers and children die yearly in 50 countries in the world for preventable conditions. And some of these conditions are really things like postpartum hemorrhage, a condition that's got medicines that can work for it.
Very inexpensive medicine.
Very cheap, about 18 cents, to make particularly oxytocin, which is a product that is indicated for prevention and treatment of postpartum hemorrhage. But guess what? This postpartum hemorrhage accounts for about 20% of all pregnancy-related deaths. And most of these happen in low and middle-income countries. But what we do see is, as often as we've had quality surveys, one of the most recent ones, I'll quickly tell you about them. In 2015, the World Health Organization conducted a quality survey to test the quality of some maternal and child health medicines, including oxytocin. They found 64%, 6 out of every 10 was failing quality tests. And we did support Nigerian regulatory agency called NAFDAC to do a survey just last year. Right, 7 out of every 10 failed quality tests.
Why is that?
So it's multiple issues, is a breakdown in the systems. So systems break down from the pre-approval. Right? Usually a medicine needs to be approved before they get to the market. And what that means is that the manufacturer has the onus to prove that this is a quality assured medicine. And they do that in multiple ways. They are going to submit dossier to say, okay, well, we've tested this product, we manufactured it according to international standards. They are supposed to provide a sample that should be tested by the regulatory agency. And then there has to be an inspection of the facility to be sure that all these three works out very well. So you can imagine if the regulatory agency does not have the capacity to do these things, now that's the first port of failure. Then subsequently, when a product that is very, very sensitive to temperature and humidity and all that, like oxytocin, gets in country, if there isn't effort to protect the quality of that product along the last mile, then you could have degradation. And therefore, you lose part of the active ingredient that makes it to be able to arrest that bleeding in women that are having delivery. But really, the challenge is to how much extent are we going to wait to have the next mother to die for 18 cents? I just don't know that.
It's an amazing idea that we would be in a world where people are dying for the need of such a small pill, but yet it's happening at a large scale. Why is that? I mean, you're out there trying to educate and build capacity in countries around the world to build systems like what we have here in the US. There's also lots of organizations donating medicine. There's organizations building health systems and supply chains. What's wrong with the current model?
I think what's wrong is that often quality assurance systems training is really literally forgotten. And I think it would be correct to really acknowledge those that had previously that really visionaries that recognized it much earlier, including USAID. At the very beginning, they realized that, it shouldn't just be drug donation or donor-led procurement and supply, but that you need to couple it with quality assurance system strengthening. And that's really what takes you to sustainability. But let me circle back first to say, you look at all these global health initiatives, whether it's ending preventable maternal, neonatal, and child health by 2030, whether it's NTB, by 2030 as well. Maybe it seems to be the magical year. Is it malaria eradication, achieving the health targets of the Sustainable Development Goals? All these rely on quality assured medicines. However, enough emphasis is not paid to that. And so you see, because we are really being very prescriptive and we want to react to disease outbreaks and emergencies and humanitarian crises, our first reflex is to donate products. And we don't go as far as thinking through how to build those systems so that health systems can be very resilient and be able to withstand the next issues that they are having. But I think, like I mentioned, there are organizations that are beginning to look more and more into this, and we are very hopeful. When that investment is done, we see huge impacts. The PKM program that I lead supported Indonesian Sambe Pharma. Sambe Pharma is one of the high performing pharmaceutical company in Indonesia. And we provided them support to really understand what international good manufacturing practices are, to really understand what it means to compile dossier and be able to submit it to a regulatory agency. Now, with that support June last year, if I recall it very well, the Sambe Pharma got WHO pre-qualification of their oxytocin. With that, now, UN agencies like UNICEF can buy quality assured oxytocin and distribute globally, addressing this issue I'm talking about. Now, in Nigeria, there's a local manufacturer, because prior to now, all the manufacturers that make oxytocin in Nigeria were all imported. Importation is good, but when you mix it with a regulatory agency that doesn't have that capacity to regulate their market, you
get the imported drugs, the quality might not be right, they don't get into the right supply chain, They're not treated appropriately.
Absolutely. So this local manufacturer now has been approved by the local authorities. And multiple benefits to that. The supply chain is shorter, right? And then the local regulatory authority has that oversight. They can get into the factory, they can do spot checks, because when you over-rely on the inspection that you've conducted pre-approval before the product made to the market, it's all not necessarily what you see post-approval.
Right. So you've got here an audience of people who are working on a lot of these issues, including some of the funding organizations, some groups that are donating medicines, some that are working on supply chains. What's your message to them? What should they be doing differently? It sounds like a short-term versus a long-term challenge. Short-term, we need to get the medicines out, even if they're donated, even if they're procured from a long distance. How do they balance that with this long-term vision you have, which is more about local manufacture, local regulation, local supply chains that are strong?
I think it's really along the same line of making sure that we're seeing quality assurance systems training as a complementary to really that donor-led procurement and supply, or even donation. It has to be complementary. If we are looking at the future where these countries are able to take these initiatives and run with it and be able to withstand economic downtimes as well as the next epidemic. We all remember what happened in West Africa, Sierra Leone, and the rest of them with Ebola. We're having instances where oral rehydration salts, infusions, and very basic things were not in the health system. That's not the world we want to see. So we want to get to the point where you couple up quality assurance system strengthening with those donor-led procurement and supply. And so using the example that USAID has done, but as well as some other governments are beginning to come up with that. Recently, just about a month ago, the Belgian government made a commitment together with their implementing partners that when they are implementing programs towards donating products, that they will couple it up with in-country system strengthening.
And that is what you see as the best practice.
That's what we see.
Think about the systems while you're doing the immediate.
That's what we see as the best practice. But again, it's not just to advocate for this area and make resources to move over there. It's also, how do you do things differently? I mean, it's not that once you address regulatory and quality assurance system strengthening, whichever way you do it, you get the end result, you get the expected outcomes and objectives. No. And I'll give you some quick examples. We've seen that when we do things like surveillance, like the oxytocin case that I told you, before now, what you see is foreign-led ad hoc, medicine study. So you have a professor, you have a researcher from the north fly into low and middle-income countries, stay in a 5-star hotel, and go around the hotel, pick samples of medicine, test them, and then come and publish reports, and then go around the think tanks in DC. That's not building sustainability. So part of what we're preaching now is for local agency-led risk-based post-marketing surveillance. The countries have to have the capacity to once in a while, maybe in a very, very regular basis, to really sample the products in their markets, understand whether some of them are failing quality tests, and be able to do something about it. So the case in Nigeria, our program, the USP PQM program, worked with the local agency. Once we found out that there was this 7 out of every 10 that was failing quality tests, we challenged them. What are you going to do?
Right.
And what the local agency did was to call all the importers and then go to the pharmacy shops to check. This is a product that should be kept at between 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, and talking about centigrade. And then they found out most of them doesn't have refrigeration, they don't have power, so they can't keep it at that temperature. So they tried to look into the distribution practices, and they told the pharmacy shops that, look, we need you to up your game. Whatever, if you don't have the resources, then that means you can't carry this product. The other thing they did was that they commissioned their clinical audits. They wanted to know the use pattern with the OBGYNs. At times, some of them are having repeated dosing of this product because what they had was not working.
Not effective.
So they learned a lot out of that. And then, most importantly, they decided to really review the dossier and the manufacturing practices of a local manufacturer, and then subsequently approve that local manufacturer. So that becomes a comprehensive way of looking at it. So you're not just looking at having a researcher go to Africa, sit down there, collect samples, and that results that they get, the local regulatory authority is not, they don't worry about it. They're not going to use it for regulatory action because they didn't even see the protocol. They didn't commission that study. But now we have a study result that they could use for action. The other one is even the manufacturing. So we work, besides oxytocin, we work with manufacturers, hundreds of manufacturers across 20 countries, from Indonesia to Philippines, to Pakistan, to Bangladesh, and several other countries in Africa. What's been very exciting and fulfilling for us is that across most of these public health medicines that the big pharma is not interested in, big generic companies may not be interested in. Some of them have very fragmented markets. They are not highly economically
Viable,
enticing. So what we've done is provided them technical assistance to say, okay, well, we hold your hand. We walk you through all the processes to get you to understand how to get a WHO approval. A WHO pre-qualification is called, right? And so we've done that for about 30 products. And with that, now we've diversified the sources of these products that are used in managing very, very challenging conditions like multi-drug resistance TB.
Well, Jude, we're out of time, but I think everyone here now has a sense of what USP actually does and why this issue matters so much.
I hope so.
And hopefully they also have a sense of the passion that you bring to this work. So in just a moment, I wonder if you can tell me, what is your hope on this issue? You've spent your whole adult life working on this. What is your hope for where we go?
My hope is that we really address all these issues at source. So one of the areas that I personally feel very passionate about is human capital development, the workforce, right? So it's not just having country-led, having the countries to lead some of these things, issues that we're talking about, but also, training out the next generation of quality assurance experts, the next generation of pharmaceutical experts and pharmaceutical management experts. So part of what we do is to go and work with pharmaceutical education regulatory bodies to say, okay, let's go back to your curriculum. Let's see whether there are things that we can do to reform that curriculum so that the next graduate is ready for the market, is ready for the industry, is ready for the regulatory agency. So we're doing that work across 4 countries. So I think for me, the most sustainable impact that we could ever have is to really work on the workforce, get the workforce ready, because with that, they will address all the next questions.
Thank you for your work on this issue. Thank you for your commitment.